Loud music jolted Emily and Robert awake for the third time that week. They both groaned, already knowing sleep was gone for the night. As they dragged themselves to the living room, the frustration was clear on their faces. Robert glanced at Emily, who sat curled up on the couch with her head in her hands. He had promised her a dream life when he said he'd buy her a house in Hawaii, but that dream had slowly turned into a nightmare. Emily and Robert Swanson had always pictured a peaceful life surrounded by Hawaii's beautiful beaches and green hills. After years of hard work and saving, they finally made it happen. They bought the perfect duplex in a quiet neighborhood with a stunning view of the ocean. The rooms were big and bright, the air smelled of salt and flowers, and the best part was the spacious garden. They'd imagined hosting barbecues and family get-togethers there, and the gentle crash of waves nearby made it all feel magical. For a while, life really was everything they'd hoped for. It felt almost too perfect, and soon enough, that feeling proved right. The first sign of trouble came one calm Sunday afternoon. Emily and Robert had decided to take down an old broken playset sitting awkwardly in the corner of their yard. The real estate agent had confirmed it was part of their property, so they were free to remove it. They planned to build their own safe playset one day when they had kids, but this one was a hazard. The wood was soft with rot, the swings hung unevenly, and nails poked out in strange places. When Robert gave the frame a shake, he was surprised it hadn't already fallen apart. He hoped no child had been on it recently. It could have ended badly. Just as Robert started to take it apart, a woman stormed out from the neighboring unit. Her face was red with fury, her voice sharp and loud. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, glaring at him as she stepped closer. Emily stepped forward, trying to keep her voice calm. "We're the new owners," she said. "We're just removing this old playset." "Who are you?" The woman shot back instantly, her tone sharp. "I live next door." "How dare you take that down? It's not yours to touch." Robert felt his temper rise. He couldn't believe the way this stranger was speaking to Emily. "Excuse me," he said firmly, "but this playset is in our yard." "We spoke with the property manager and they confirmed we have every right to remove it." "That playset belongs to my children," the woman yelled. Her name, as they soon learned, was Tanya. "This yard is a shared space. You don't get to do whatever you want here without my permission." The Swansons exchanged a look. This made absolutely no sense. Before buying the place, they'd made sure to ask about the garden boundaries, and the answer had been clear. That section was entirely theirs. So Robert told Tanya to leave their property unless she wanted him to call the police for trespassing. Fuming, Tanya stormed off, but not before shouting a few choice words over her shoulder. The whole encounter left Emily and Robert rattled. They hadn't expected this kind of aggression from a neighbor. No matter how they tried to explain, Tanya wouldn't listen, instead accusing them of destroying her children's happiness. Sadly, this was only the start of something much worse. From that day on, Tanya seemed determined to make their lives miserable. The peaceful neighborhood they had fallen in love with quickly turned into a source of stress. She took the removal of the playset as a personal challenge, and she fought back with full force. Soon, Tanya and her boyfriend Billy began hosting loud gatherings that lasted late into the night. The sounds of shouting, laughter, and blasting music carried straight into the Swansons' home. Many times the noise spilled into their yard, and when Emily or Robert tried to ask the guests to move, they were met with sneers and nasty comments. A few even tried to intimidate them. It wasn't just annoying, it was exhausting. The couple barely got any sleep, and their dream home was quickly turning into a nightmare. One night, things got completely out of hand. The music was blaring, people were shouting, and it felt like the walls were shaking. Exhausted and fed up, Emily decided she'd had enough. She walked over to Tanya's door and knocked firmly. When Tanya opened it, the response was instant and ugly. "You think you can come here and tell us how to live?" Tanya snapped, her face twisted with anger. "Get off my property." Emily almost laughed at the irony. Tanya never stayed off their property when asked. But instead of arguing, she pulled out her phone and called the police to file a formal complaint. When the officers arrived, the noise suddenly dropped. Tanya quickly ushered her guests away from the Swansons' yard, pretending as if nothing had happened. Emily explained everything to the officers, hoping they'd finally see what she and Robert were dealing with. But the moment Tanya started talking, the entire tone changed. The woman who had been so aggressive seconds ago was suddenly all smiles. She told the police it was all just a misunderstanding, that her guests might have wandered a bit too far. She even apologized sweetly and promised it wouldn't happen again. It was a complete act. And it worked. Emily felt her stomach twist with anger. Somehow Tanya had turned the whole thing around, making her look like the uptight neighbor who couldn't handle a bit of noise. When Tanya promised to respect their space from now on, she said it with a smug little grin that made Emily's blood run cold. Both she and Robert could tell this was far from over, and they were right. A few nights later, Tanya threw an even bigger gathering. The music pounded through the walls, laughter spilling into the Swansons' living room. Emily and Robert sat there tense and tired, trying to ignore it until the impossible happened. Out of nowhere, one of Tanya's guests stumbled right through their front door. He reeked of alcohol and slurred that Tanya had told him he could use their bathroom. Emily froze in disbelief while Robert demanded he leave immediately. But instead of backing off, the man grew furious. He started shouting insults and even grabbed a few picture frames, throwing them to the floor. Panicked, they called the police again, but by the time officers arrived, the man was gone. Tanya, of course, denied everything, claiming she had no idea who he was or why he'd done it. She even accused Emily and Robert of exaggerating to make her look bad. That night left them shaken. Their safe haven now felt invaded, and the peace they dreamed of was gone. They lay awake wondering if they'd made a mistake moving there. Still, they hoped Tanya would eventually lose interest and stop. But deep down, they feared the truth. Things were only going to get worse. Just when Emily and Robert thought things couldn't possibly get worse, they did. It became painfully clear that Tanya and Billy were out for revenge, any way they could get it. Soon, the Swansons started waking up to find cigarette butts and empty cans scattered all over their once pristine yard. Every morning, Emily would look out the window and feel her heart sink at the sight of their garden covered in trash. Robert finally confronted Tanya about it, but she just smirked and said it must have been some wild animals. That was the last straw. Determined to prove it was her, Robert set up a camera to catch them in the act. But once Tanya and Billy realized they were being watched, they got sneakier. They stopped throwing things into the backyard and started vandalizing the front instead. Emily's garden ornaments were smashed, and one morning they found deep scratches running across their car. Robert's patience was wearing thin. He'd always been taught to take the high road, but now he was struggling to hold himself back. Every part of him wanted to march next door and tell them exactly what he thought. Still, he somehow managed to keep his cool. Barely. Unfortunately, the nightmare wasn't over yet. A few days later, Billy decided to take things even further. One morning, Robert noticed a huge 30-foot fishing boat tied up in their docking space. Billy had just claimed it as his own. The Swansons had been renting that spot to another family in the neighborhood since they didn't own a boat themselves. But Tanya and Billy had called that family pretending to be the Swansons, saying they needed to move their boat a few feet down the dock to make room for Billy's. When the renters bumped into Emily and Robert later, they were confused and a bit frustrated. "You told us to move our boat," they said, "but now someone else is in your spot." Emily and Robert were stunned. The nerve of it was unbelievable. Once again, they called the police. When the officer arrived and knocked on Tanya's door, Billy tried to argue that the Swansons didn't own the water and that he could dock wherever he liked. But when the officer warned that the fishing boat would be removed if it wasn't moved immediately, Billy finally gave in, though not quietly. As he untied the boat, both he and Tanya screamed across the yard, accusing the Swansons of ruining their lives. The irony was almost too much to take. Emily and Robert stood there, hearts pounding, realizing just how far their neighbors were willing to go to make them miserable. The final straw came one night after yet another of Tanya and Billy's out-of-control parties. A drunk friend of theirs tried to back his Jeep out of the driveway, lost control, and slammed right into the Swansons' car. The vehicle hit a small wooden ramp Tanya's kids used for skateboarding tricks, flipped slightly, and ended up half-parked on top of the Swansons' car. Emily and Robert ran outside in shock. Their car was completely crushed. They pressed charges immediately, and the driver's insurance company agreed to cover the damages. But money wasn't enough to make up for the constant stress and anger they'd endured. This was beyond frustrating. It was heartbreaking. Still, fate had something unexpected in store for them, a bit of payback they never could have planned themselves. A few weeks later, after another long day of dealing with noise and chaos, Emily's phone rang. It was their landlord. He sounded tired, completely worn down. He told her he was done dealing with Tanya and Billy. They'd caused nothing but problems, and he wanted out. Since he knew they couldn't afford to buy the duplex they were renting, he asked Emily and Robert if they would be interested in purchasing it. Emily's eyes widened. She put the phone on speaker so Robert could hear. By the time the landlord finished explaining, they were both grinning from ear to ear. They could hardly believe their luck. If they bought the other half of the duplex, that meant Tanya and Billy would have to leave, and they'd finally have control over who lived next door. After months of misery, this was the first real spark of hope. Without hesitation, they agreed. They gathered every bit of savings they had, determined to make it work. Signing the papers felt like reclaiming their peace, one signature at a time. Even though they were bursting with excitement, they kept quiet about it. Whenever Tanya and Billy threw another loud party or dumped trash into their yard, Emily and Robert just exchanged knowing looks. Soon the nightmare would be over, and their little piece of paradise in Hawaii would finally be theirs again. With the sale finalized, Emily and Robert could hardly wait to deliver the news. Their hearts thumped as they walked up to Tanya and Billy's door, excitement and nerves mixing in equal measure. When Tanya opened it and saw them standing there, her expression darkened instantly. She started to close the door, but Robert spoke first, calm and steady. "We just wanted to let you know," he said, "that we now own this property, and we're raising the rent." Tanya froze, her mouth dropping open. "You can't do that," she yelled. "Actually," Emily said softly, we can, and we will. If you can't meet the new rate, please take this as your notice to vacate." The color drained from Tanya's face, and for once, she didn't have a snarky comeback. Billy shouted something from inside, but it didn't matter. The power had shifted completely. After months of torment, the Swansons finally had the upper hand. It was quiet, satisfying, justice. Tanya and Billy tried to fight it, of course. They argued, complained, and stalled, but the law was on Emily and Robert's side this time. And when it became clear they couldn't bully their way out of it, they packed up and slipped away in the middle of the night. When the Swansons woke to find the duplex next door empty, they stood in the yard for a long moment, just breathing. For the first time in months, there was silence. No shouting, no blaring music, no chaos. Just the sound of the ocean and the rustle of palm trees. Peace had finally returned. With Tanya and Billy gone, Emily and Robert began to enjoy the life they had dreamed of all along. They spent their days gardening, exploring the island, and inviting loved ones to visit. Emily was especially thrilled when her parents decided to move into the other unit. It felt like everything had come full circle. The Swansons were deeply grateful. After all the turmoil, they finally had their piece of paradise back, and they weren't taking a single quiet moment for granted. The Swansons were finally settling back into peace, their days filled with sunshine, quiet mornings, and the gentle sound of the waves. They had almost managed to forget the chaos Tanya had caused, until one afternoon Emily's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. To her surprise, it was Tanya's mother. Her voice was calm but heavy with emotion. She apologized deeply for her daughter's behavior and thanked Emily and Robert for the patience they'd shown. She explained that Tanya had always had a bad habit of stirring up trouble where there didn't need to be any, and in the past it had even gotten her dangerously close to serious consequences. The woman admitted she was grateful because most people would have handled Tanya far more harshly. But the Swansons, despite everything, had stayed respectful and careful, especially around the children. She said that kindness had spared her grandchildren from witnessing even more conflict. Emily felt touched. She could hear the regret in the woman's voice and sensed how hard it must have been for her to make that call. She assured her that everything was in the past now, that there were no hard feelings, and that all anyone wanted was peace. When the call ended, Emily and Robert sat together for a while, quietly reflecting. The nightmare Tanya and Billy had brought into their lives was truly over, and in its place was calm, happiness, and gratitude. Their dream home in Hawaii finally felt like home again. What a wild story about dealing with a nightmare neighbor. How would you have handled it? Would you have stayed as calm as the Swansons? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-life stories like this one.